So, so let me show you. I think maybe we can do a tour, like a quick tour of like the two main pieces are like these two massive drawings, and they are based on like Buckingham Palace white drawing room. They're all charcoal and paper, and the values are inverted, so everything that's white it's in shadow. Everything that's in shadow is lit or not lit, but it's the paper that's giving that that effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think with your work in it's dealing with this post-colonial moment, but there's something kind of that this could be an image from centuries ago to right now.
Absolutely.
Right? And in the same way for this work as well with the piano and the arrows and the phonograph, right? That these images and these objects seem so contemporary, especially with this image and the light inversion, right? That just speaks so much or reminds us so much of photography as a base, specifically like digital photography and manipulation. Yeah. And then to see all these works, you actually can't, you want to say it feels very now, but then if you try to find any evidence, that evidence is actually so negotiable. Yeah. So there's I think a really interesting way that, you know, you're thinking about neocolonialism as a condition that is not singular, but might be felt by us as we're experiencing it now as singular, but actually is much more resonant culturally and socially and as these longer terms.
Identity politics, I think. Well, I think that the name of the show is Empire, and it's dealing with, I think what you were saying about the show you're creating, you're installing this idea of these empires that have fallen, and we're still negotiating the structures that are still maybe relevant or not, and how we negotiate all those rules of engagement. And for me, I think that like focusing on these Victorian rooms where power is inverted, bring about that conversation of colonialism, exploitation, violence, which is camouflaged in the gilded, heavily ornamented room. So it's definitely talking about that's not a singular experience, but more so a pretext for speaking of other ideas.
Yeah. Well, especially like in this way, in thinking about empire and all of the labor that it took to create the wealth of this.
That's not seen.
Of this space, right? That the gold and the ornateness of the Baroque or of the Rococo, right, is based off of the labor of enslaved individuals. Absolutely. And of the worldwide colonial thrust of France and European countries. And so what
for centuries,
right?
Yeah.
That there is
an accumulation of wealth,
and that accumulation of wealth isn't without. For so long, we speak of the French Empire or the British Empire as a singularity outside of kind of the country's nations, civilizations, right? That it extracted the labor from. And with you creating these works and the way that you work is so labor intensive, right? That you can actually see, knowing that this is charcoal, knowing that this is drawing, seeing the labor it takes for you to create something like this is also speaking to, I think, that capitalist experience in kind of your form, like and practice as an artist.
Absolutely, I think it's me ironically using the same tools of the empire to acquire these images, and in my process, in the creative process, all the labor intensive. I mean, being them so labor intensive, it's mimicking the same sort of structure that's out there. Yeah, absolutely.
And in looking specifically with this room and the phonograph and the piano, right, that these are luxury items.
Absolutely.
Right, so the luxury component of that this labor was based off of an experience of luxury or an experience of decadence.
Correct. But also I think to the idea that all this was done, or the empire had upon itself the responsibility of dealing with the savages in a different manner, like illuminating them.
Yeah.
Bringing culture, bringing, classic music, the piano as a symbol of European classical culture, and then having that tension in how does one bridge these two worlds together,
right,
for it to make sense or not.
Yeah, and I think like how empires then also used music as a way to then exploit those of the countries that have been dominated, right? So if we think about, like, of course, Josephine Baker, right? And specifically like your use of the banana, but even like with the monopoly of patriotism, this reminds me specifically of jazz in the United States.
Yeah.
Right, and jazz as the uniquely American art form
Absolutely.
that is based off of African American traditions, where there's African Americans, being on this continent and within the United States specifically because of the transatlantic slave trade. So, and kind of the patriotism that is specifically speaking to these instruments and the legacy of music within the United States is entirely based on kind of these legacies of imperialism.
Absolutely. And I think these images more so they make reference to Fitzcarraldo, the movie, where the absurdity of bringing this culture to the savages and what happens, and I mean how this is appropriated without really having a assimilation process of what's coming in and how to assimilate that and react to it in a manner that seems natural or organic. It's imposed, and then one is involved in this absurd dance with this music or imposed rules of engagement. So
yeah, and specifically like the expectation, right? There's this expectation of, I think there's also like an expectation of how we think of empire and colonialism as this as a very distant experience and something that has dates, right? And something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the way that we are now tracking, or especially with your work, right, that these are injections and into this history to also bring back to us, right, as this not only a reminder but a call to action.
Definitely a call to action.
That these moments should not only be not forgotten, but then also kind of acknowledged for the power that they had and the people that have continuously and always, right, been resistors within this as well.
Correct.
So, and I think kind of that conversation brings us to this image and to this work as both. I mean, I think it can be read in two ways, right? One as a vulnerability, in that the fire is all consuming, but then also that this person running with the bananas as head, and the fire is also inherently dangerous.
Absolutely. And I think the idea of burning, it's sort of carried, well, the idea of light is carried throughout the works. And the light is how I own these images, because I find these images on Google, or I take them myself and I make collages. But once they're like drawn, is my chance to really change them through the use of light. Right. So in this case, fire, but also relating to the images of the inverted white drawing rooms, where the idea of the negative is also similar to the burning of a negative.
Right.
The chemical process of burning the negative. having a relationship with photography, but also having this phantasmagoric sort of environment that seemed that it's all burnt, or this idea of light using an awkward manner.
Yeah.
Sort of destabilizing the expectations or how one relates to the image.
Right.
It's you think you know how to navigate them, but since they're inverted, it's counterintuitive in so many ways. So I think the idea of light is something that is prevalent.
I think even, metaphorically or poetically as well, as like what do we find in the shadows, right? What do the shadows tell us about how an object is created,
Absolutely.
right? Something else, how does its reflection against the light tell us more about what actually the object consists of? Even looking at this work with the shadows of the chairs, right? The chairs, the shadow extends far past the chair.
Yeah.
And the ways that imperialism and the effects of imperialism has affected.
Yeah, well, and also something that is meant to illuminate is actually used to cast a shadow.
Right.
So I think one sees, and that's what's for me enticing in making these is that what seems that it's all darkness, it's actually the light. So it makes you think of that relationship of going back metaphorically of how culture illuminates or shadows other cultures.
Right. No, but I think like moving on to these works, right? The use of nature and architecture becomes so not only important to your work, but inherently in dialogue between kind of these specifically European architectural styles, and kind of not only the influence of nature, specifically palm trees, specifically looking at, these very tropical natural elements, but then also how these make, aggressive or have an aggressive or kind of confronting presence in these works.
Absolutely. And I think that the fact of having these spaces of performance, right? There are theaters or there are places where used to entertain. This is a room at the Louvre, and then there's a theater that's a banquet hall. So this idea of performing, of being the alien in the image and trying to blend in. So I think all these spaces and having the this tropical elements blending in a way, seamlessly trying to blend in, but in a way also standing out.
Right.
So I think that constant act of negotiation is something that's present.
And what's interesting is that you're not necessarily using the stage either, right? So you're using the audience members and the people that are participating in these cultural events. So it's also those people, right, that are
Absolutely.
Entering different echelons of, European-centered culture, specifically like around capitalism and class, and how that is also a negotiation for
Absolutely.
people, not only on stage, but off stage. And kind of,
a good point.
and in thinking about the people that are taking the seats and watching different performances, right? How is the interconnection and responsibility to one another from the assumed at certain points and has been present people of color or different people who have been part of indigenous cultures right on the stage and performing to those same people who have assimilated in certain ways to governing specifically like
The
centered around
establishment,
the establishment or European classes, right?
Absolutely.
And that the negotiations with not only oneself, but also the recognition of each other.
Absolutely. I think that the idea of the other is something that's been, a consistent preoccupation within the work. Like who's the other and how to perform that otherness. And in my sense, it's also how to paradoxically make myself an other. So how am I exoticizing myself as well? So I think this idea of hybridity and exoticization and having that sense of the other is always present as well.
Right. Well, right, and the pressures to perform the otherness in
Absolutely.
certain ways, right? And not only, you know, the different ways that performity occurs, there are, you know, good and bad ways to do that, right? And acceptable and unacceptable ways in order to, you know, present oneself as the other, right? Yeah.
And I think that as being the Latino in the States for 20 years, and having this idea of assimilation and the struggles in assimilation and how does one assimilate to a culture or not, has been like a constant preoccupation within these stages.
Yeah.
But also these the use of architecture and the spaces, architectural spaces where one performs.
Right.
So I think that the viewer is always, and I think physically, it's either I'm trying also in another realm to involve the viewer as trying to arrange a space for them to be intimate with the work, having the scale of the work also bring meaning, but also being immersed with these huge, larger-than-life places.
Yeah.
That sense of scale is also sort of explored in the relationship with the object itself.
Yeah. I mean, I think that becomes so apparent in specifically this work, right, where we're kind of grappling not only with the chandelier, but with also the European centralized figure above the fireplace.
Yeah, the queen that changed races. Yeah, one is sort of grapple between, you know, that expectation of finding the queen, and then it's something completely different, just by the switching the values.
And I think it phantomizes the queen and the specificity of this room, as in, you know, that these rooms also exist in the United States, right? Like that the influence of not only like colonial European architecture is present, of course, in Europe and in the Caribbean and in all of the various instances of European colonialism, but still holds importance and significance and performativity of like certain class and, you know, capitalistic ranks as it's kind of presented in all of these ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's what becomes so present for the chandelier, is that the chandelier still becomes such a symbolic importance to, and something so legible, I think, in ways that isn't always articulated. Yeah. Right, that the importance of a chandelier in a great house and a great foyer is to have that space, to just
it's a symbol of status,
and to have enough height in one's home, right, to be able to, right, like if you have an ability to hang a chandelier, then you have a large home. Like it just doesn't.
Absolutely.
It's not a watch, it's not diamonds, right, that anyone can actually home. Like this is about architecture and who has ability to present such a work.
Yeah, and I have to say that, like, I totally agree, but also within the personal vocabulary that I've been, you know, building throughout all these years, it's not only a chandelier, but it's a banana chandelier. So this hybrid image that's been lit in so many ways. It's in a vertical format now. It has fallen, and it's close to being not lit.
Yeah.
So I think that adds another layer to the fact of this image, this object is on the floor, once it's used to be in the center foyer of a home, but it's fallen. So again, having this idea of the empire, that all of these structures, architectural, cultural structures, are falling metaphorically.
Yeah.
And the chandelier, the banana chandelier, is on the ground. So implying sort of a reconsideration of all those structures.
Right, right. And the possibility of it's consuming itself, right? That it decomposes,
exactly.
Right? That it inherently within its own self, right? Like as soon as like it's too ripe, like this is too sweet, this light is too bright, these crystals are too clear, to where that this crystallizes to such an effect that it, again, as you said, like falls back into the earth in so many ways.
And I think that organic quality, it's also
like literal
present.
Organic quality.
Yeah, it's also present with the piano piece. That it's dying. It's gonna decay and go back to the ground as well. So it's sort of using, refocusing, going back to the ground, which is not sort of an organic reference to the chandelier that's man-made.
Let's go to this work. And speaking about the man-made, and that this work in particular, again, looking at the chandelier, also like very much reminds me of architecture of a chandelier, but like of a city. Like there's something very composed and compositional about the work.
Yeah, well, it's a chandelier that's lit. But again, this idea of inverting the values. So light becomes like blobs of charcoal.
Yeah. But so, gorgeous blobs of charcoal. I mean, there's something so compelling about that.
Yes. There's something compelling and also awkward of trying to draw light. By using the opposite, by using the charcoal sticks, rather than using the paper to imply that sense of light. So I think it's a departure from it's a counterintuitive drawing, in the sense that everything is flipped, making it hard to recognize the image at first.
Yeah. No, from far away, I didn't know that it was a chandelier. It was only until I got close that I could recognize these droplets. But it looked like a building to me, right? It looked like a fantastic Art Deco building. And then I was like, oh, it's a chandelier. But again, like similar to the other, right, just on the brink of falling down. Correct.
Well, in this case, it's floating.
Right.
There's no reference to the space, rather than it's in the center. And there's no reference whatsoever of anything.
But that it's held up still.
Yeah.
Like that's, that it hasn't, the precipice has yet
to... Correct. I like that word, the precipice. Yeah.
The precipice of empire, of capitalism, right, of that teetering, right, is still in the future, is still in the potential. Correct. These works this is the first image of a figure.
Yes, the figure is coming out slowly and unexpectedly. So again, I've been using references to art history, to architecture, and to history itself.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's Leda. Instead of having a swan, it's a macaw. But also this unexpected encounter between, Zeus, instead of reincarnating into a swan, it's a tropical bird, which is a macaw, in a very French, 18th century French painting, landscape tradition.
Yeah.
Trying to reference that a little bit more, but sort of changing again, trying to play with the expectations of how one navigates an image, knowing the myth and knowing the history of images similar to these.
Right.
So,
And I think this piece, more so than any other piece in the show, kind of elucidates, right, your specific decision to use black and white and specifically charcoal, because you expect, I mean, you know, it's a macaw, like I'm projecting the colors onto this, right? And then to also see that refusal from you, right, that this is not not only, right, like a stylistic and formal choice, but a conceptual choice as well.
Correct. And I think I've been battling with sort of the cultural expectations of color within my work. So, you know, instead of having the expectation of, you know, Flemish painting.
Right.
Flemish painting looks in a certain manner, or Italian painters or Spanish painters. But also, being from a Latin background, having this expectation of being something colorful. And I've been denying that for several years now, in the aim of focusing on the imagery and how the imagery itself can take the work to a different place, unexpected place. Hopefully.
Right.
So yeah, tropical macaws, black and white macaws.